Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reading 5 books that I regret buying. I feel like the title of this video is pretty self-explanatory. At the beginning of this year, I sat down and I looked at my physical TBR really hard, heart to heart with myself about the books that I have purchased in the past and about the fact that I deeply regret purchasing, I would say more than half of the books that I physically own. And I am righting those wrongs this year by reading the majority of the books that I physically own and, figuring out if all of these are poor purchases or if maybe there are some gems among the muck. So in this video, I'm going to be reading 5 of the books that I physically own and seeing if I truly deeply regret buying these books, if there are redeeming qualities in some of these books. If you want to see my initial video kind of going through, I want to say like 30 books that I regret buying. I'll leave a link in the description down below. Today, obviously, I'm only reading 5 of those books, but they run the gamut when it comes to genre, and I'm excited to do this. I'm excited to endeavor on this path. I really think that there are going to be some books that end up surprising us, so the 5 books that I'm going to be reading for this video are number 1, Honest Illusions by Nora Roberts. This is a book about a magician, her falling in love or something like that. I ended up picking this book up initially because I was going to do a video where I read books that I knew very little about. I decided to ditch that video idea, but I am going to be reading this book and we're going to see if it's any good. Next up, we have There Will Come a Darkness. This is a YA fantasy that I had heard was sapphic, and that's solely the reason I picked it up. Will it actually be sapphic? Will this be a book that I enjoy? I don't know. We're going to find out. Next up, we have Fountains of Silence by Rita Sepetys. This is a YA historical fiction. Why I decided that I wanted a historical fiction book on my shelves, a book that I purchased, I'm pretty sure last year. That was another one of those books that I picked up for a video. I was like, ooh, what if I read some historical fiction and like see if I like this? I don't like historical fiction, okay? So that purchase was dumb. I regret those purchases. And we're gonna see if this is any good and if this purchase was really that regrettable. Next up, we have The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender. This is a book that was really hyped on YouTube a couple of years ago. I say a couple of years ago, many a year ago, by some of the bigger creators in this space. And it's a book that I probably wouldn't have picked up on my own had I not heard it hyped. But I think this is kind of a magical story set in a contemporary setting about a girl with wings or something like that. I don't know much more than that. I've heard that it is kind of a sweeping family saga as well. And then lastly, we have Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a YA fantasy story, again, set in a contemporary setting, a little bit magical. I know there's a word for it, but I can't for the life of me think of what that word is. And this is a continuation, kind of, spin-off series, kind of the Raven cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. I really liked The Raven Boys. That, like, those first initial 3 books were great. The 4th one didn't end great. And I've heard that this series kind of picks up where the last left off, but I kind of wish that, like, that one had just been the wrap-up. So will this one be good? Will I stay firm in my regret of buying it? I'm not quite sure, but we're gonna find out here in this video today. So let's go ahead and hop into the vlog portion of this video. So I've picked up my first book for this video. I'm 40% into Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. Despite initially regretting picking this book up and, purchasing it in the first place, I'm actually not hating it, and I feel like I have lots of thoughts and feelings. So Call Down the Hawk is the first book in a new, I want to say trilogy, and it's supposed to be sort of a continuation of the Raven Boys series. A spin-off, but also kind of a continuation. I will be honest with you, whenever I heard that this book was coming out, I wasn't that excited about it. I definitely bought into the hype. That's why I own the book in the first place. And while I did really enjoy the Raven Boys as a series, ultimately really disappointed in that 4th book because it didn't answer all of the questions that I felt like needed to be answered to wrap up the series as a whole. I feel like this book is actually answering a lot of the questions that were left lingering in that 4th book, and while I wish, to be honest, that all those questions had been answered in that 4th book and that there wasn't another series, I'm actually not upset about reading this. So this book obviously follows Ronan and his 2 brothers. I want to say Declan and Matthew. For some reason I want to call him Max, but I'm pretty sure his name's Matthew. Ronan at the beginning of the story is kind of trying to figure out what to do with his life as the people around him are kind of figuring out what they're doing. Everybody seems to have a plan. He doesn't really have one. Ronan is obviously one of the main characters in that first series. If you don't really know anything about that series, I don't think I'll be spoiling anything, but be kind of talking about the other series. So Ronan at the beginning of the story ends up going and visiting Adam, his boyfriend, and I think that's been the most interesting thing to me so far is seeing the interactions between Ronan and Adam and seeing how Adam at Harvard is really a different person, but how he is, I think, leaning into the person he's always wanted to be now that he's out from underneath the shadow of his wealthier and maybe more successful outwardly friends. So it's really interesting seeing how that is contrasting with Ronan, who seems to be kind of stuck in the past, especially with a lot of the dreaming, I guess, that he has going on. Ronan is, again, trying to kind of figure out his life, and he's also dealing with the consequences of being a dreamer. Being a dreamer in the context of this world means that when you have a dream at night, you typically bring things back from the dream world. You can dream people, you can dream animals, just a ton of different things. And this can be sort of detrimental to the dreamers and to the people around them, right? Like waking up to a bed full of live crabs, maybe not the best thing ever. The book as a whole, I think, is trying to do a thing where it's answering some questions and also raising new questions. The, I think, general crux of the book, beyond these sort of like interpersonal struggles or internal struggles, I guess, of the characters of each of the separate Lynch brothers, idea that dreamers are a class of people. Ronan is not the only person who dreams, neither is his father. Instead, there are a bunch of different people who have different sorts of dreams and bring different things back from their dreams, and there is like a whole host of people, an organization of people who are trying to eliminate dreamers because I don't know why we're trying to eliminate dreamers, to be honest. I haven't really understood that until this point, but we're getting the POV of someone who is in leagues with, I guess, the dreamer assassins, and we're also getting the POV of another dreamer. So there's a lot of new point of views here, and initially, I won't lie, I was a little bit confused at what was going on. I was like, I don't really understand what the fuck's happening. I did pull up summary of the story, not a summary, but a chapter by chapter kind of summary to kind of re-explain some things that I already read, and that really, really helped. So now I feel like I'm really enmeshed in the world and definitely get what's going on. The writing is typical Maggie Stiefvater. I will say the writing is definitely a double-edged sword in that it is really beautiful prose, and I'm appreciating a lot of the metaphor included, but at the same time, it is not helping when the subject matter of the story is a little bit ephemeral. Having this writing that feels a little bit flowery is kind of making it difficult to understand like what's happening versus like what's a dream and like what the actual plot of the book is. Once I Googled, I was like, oh, that's what's happening. Okay. I'm also in kind of a weird situation because on the one hand, I can appreciate that this book is answering questions. On the other hand, I do regret buying this book because I don't think for me personally it was necessary to continue on with the series and to figure out what's happening to these characters. I mean, it's nice to revisit characters that I do enjoy, and I don't think that the plot of this book is stupid or not well done, so I guess that's good, but I'm just kind of like, did this need to exist, and do I need to be reading it despite it being good? I don't know. I was fully expecting this one and Fountain of Silence to be the two books that I was like really not into, and this one's actually going pretty well. I don't see myself rating this less than 3 stars, which is really good in my books. For a book I regret buying, I'm not hating it. Last night I ended up finishing Call Down the Hawk, and this was a 3-star read, which I think is good, all things considered. I will say my enjoyment of the story definitely started going down at the 50% mark simply because it ended up becoming a little too convoluted for my taste. The whole idea of the series is really focused on dreams and the weird shit that comes out of dreams. Yes, I appreciate that it's a little bit grounded in reality in the sense that, again, there is this like group of people trying to bring down these dreamers, but the majority of the end of the book is a wild ride of confusing twists and turns, and I think if you're someone who really, really loves the writing of Maggie Stiefvater, I think you'll really enjoy this book. I think this is definitely her, I don't want to say strongest work to date, but it definitely showcases her strength, which is her writing. She's really good at crafting these interesting, complex worlds, I think, and in really getting you to feel a sense of place and to feel what's going on around your characters. Maybe not emotionally, but in terms of the, I guess, scenery and the weird things that happen in the dreams. So it's a tough one for me because on the one hand, I think I do regret buying it ultimately, but on the other hand, I'm not actually upset that I read this, and I'm glad that I actually gave this series a chance. I won't be continuing on with the series because I don't really care that much about this particular plot line and this continuation of the story. However, I can appreciate that it is not unnecessary. Let's move on to something that is really, really taking me by surprise in a positive way. Fountains of Silence. This book is set in Spain after the Second World War, and it follows a cast full of characters dealing with the fallout from World War II. Admittedly, I don't know that much about Spain in general as a country and their history, but I specifically don't know very much about the fascism, I guess you could say, that this country was facing after that world war. So this book follows our two main characters, I would say. There's some other additional characters, but the two main characters are Daniel and Julia. And Julia at the start of the story is working at a Hilton hotel, and she is living with her sister, I think her sister's husband, and they are trying to save up so they can go and move to, I want to say the countryside or something, and really have better lives because they're living pretty much in poverty and just trying to make it through in these sort of shitty circumstances that they're being dealt. Immediately being dropped into this world, I say world as if this is something that didn't happen. Immediately we're dropped into this time and this place, and admittedly I was super ignorant about Spain was like after, World War II, and immediately I was like, okay, I'm interested. I really want to see where this goes. Then we get introduced to Daniel, who is a boy from Texas, and he dreams of being a journalist. His experience in his lens is that of kind of a privileged boy. His family, I want to say, are like oil barons, pretty wealthy family, pretty well to do. His mom is Spanish, his father I don't think is, but they come to Spain for a couple of different reasons. And Daniel, while he's there, is making his mission to take pictures to win a journalism competition to hopefully win a prize, which would be money to allow him to go to journalism school instead of going to Texas A&M to learn oil stuff. So Daniel and Julia cross paths because Daniel is staying at the same hotel that Julia works at, and he kind of gets to see what Spain is really like through Julia's eyes. Additionally, we have a third character who I honestly can't remember the name of, but she is a girl working at an orphanage, and we are finding out that things that are happening at this orphanage are definitely not good. I don't think the children are being abused, but I think that children in Spain are being kidnapped from their families and is sold off to the highest bidder and or sold off to these proper Spanish families. And every part of this book is interesting to me. I don't know why I thought that I wouldn't like this. I mean, I do, but I don't. It's kind of reminding me in some ways of Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, in that it is a time period that I'm quite unfamiliar with, and I want to continue reading, not because, no offense, I care that much about the plight of these characters, but because I want to learn more about this time period and the things that were happening to people in this time period. Not to say that adding a personal human touch with main characters is a bad thing, but for me, what really draws me in is, again, this time period that I just really don't think about much, and I didn't really learn much even in my history classes. Want to keep reading this book. I had plans today actually to read another book, to finish a romance and post a video tomorrow, but instead all I want to do is finish this book, and I couldn't be more surprised, frankly. I'm liking this book. I would be surprised if I rated this lower than like a 4-star, which I never thought I'd say about a YA historical fiction book, but something about it's compelling. I will say, my only real critique of this book, the only thing that I'm not absolutely loving, is the fact that at times, especially at the beginning of the book, it feels like we are being read a textbook rather than being put in the shoes of our main characters. And I do think it's nice seeing the world through the lens of characters that you can relate to, because that's, I think, a really good way to experience history and to really like empathize and understand what people are going through. But I think at the beginning of the story, you're kind of like getting weird glimpses into people's lives, and it doesn't feel like actual personal experience. It just feels like you're reading, like a textbook. That's irritating, and I do sometimes get like flashbacks or like glimpses into that. Sometimes the writing can fall back into that, but for the most part, I am rooting for the characters, even if like I'm not amazed by the characters. I care enough about them to see what happens. I am curious to see if Daniel, gets into his journalism program. I'm hoping that Julia gets to have the life she deserves, and I'm hoping that this girl in the orphanage uncovers some shit and is able to make meaningful change. Probably won't happen, but like, I'm hoping. So I'm going to continue reading this book. I'm going to finish it, and I will update you tomorrow morning on it. I finished The Fountains of Silence last night, and this was really phenomenal. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I'm kind of surprised, honestly. These first 2 books have taken me by surprise in the best possible way. And this one really, I think, might be the standout of the entire video, which is kind of astounding to me, as I definitely predicted this to be like the worst one, or the one that I was going to like the least. But the elements of this book came together so beautifully. It's exactly the kind of way that I like a story to be told, if that makes sense. So the book kind of starts out, and I think I talked about it a little bit, with a few different characters. We have Daniel, we have Anna, not Julia. I don't know why I kept calling her Julia. There is a character named Julia in the story. I think she is the sister of Anna. Anyway, we have a bunch of different characters doing a bunch of different random things, and as the story kind of like comes together and reaches a peak, we realize that all of these characters are tied to this one specific thing, which is specifically the lost children. I don't know what the name, like the official name is, I guess, of these children who were kidnapped by the political party at the time, but essentially, I cannot remember the names of the 2 political parties. I know one of them was the Republicans. They're the ones that were out of favor, and then there was like the fascists, right? The fascists end up up kidnapping the children of the Republicans and selling them, other people, I guess, selling them to the fascists, selling them to Americans, selling them to just other people in general. The story really heavily deals with that. And at the beginning of the story, you really think it's just going to be a story about fascism in general, a story about Franco's regime, but it really does evolve into something that definitely focuses heavily on this one particular topic, which is these children. Wow, I mean, it just came together so well. It was very well done, and you do end up really growing to care about the characters. My only real critique of the story, to be honest, is that I think I don't want to say focused on the wrong people, but I would have liked to see a more satisfying conclusion at the end of the book. We realize that there were some like twins essentially separated at birth, and it would have been really cool to get to see those twins reunited. I don't know if that would have been like too cheesy to end the book, but I feel like that would have been a really nice conclusion, wrap up to the story. I didn't actually end up caring that much about Daniel and Anna's relationship. Like, I mean, it was nice seeing them, you know, get together, but I really cared more about like the surrounding cast of characters, so I think that was just like a me thing. I mean, this book just took me by surprise. I think if you don't know anything about Spain in this time period and you were willing to like step outside of your comfort zone and pick up historical fiction or YA in general, I think this is really well done. Yeah, I'm pleased to have finished this. I think that this is not a book that I would have picked up off of my shelves very willingly. Kind of regret buying it. I don't know if I'll keep it on my shelves because I don't see myself revisiting it, but it was really fantastic. So I'm really not upset that I read it and I learned something new. So, I mean, that's all I can really ask for. The next book that I have started is one that I thought that I had a bigger chance of liking, but I'm not enjoying. So I feel like this video is just telling me maybe I just don't know my taste as well as I think that I do, but I'm like 20-ish% into There Will Come a Darkness, and this book is kind of taking me by surprise. For some reason I thought this was sapphic, and I don't know why I necessarily thought that. It definitely is giving me male-male relationship vibes, not female-female, so like whatever, it's fine. I'm not too upset about it. It is queer at the very least. This story follows 5 different characters, and they are all dealing with the fallout of like different things in their kingdom and lives. I don't even really know how to like describe this book. I mean, I'm getting exhausted thinking about it because I'm exhausted reading it because I don't really care about it that much, okay? So I'm not gonna get into the details because it would spoil the book in general, and I just feel like I'm not good at talking about fantasy, right? And I think that's probably because I'm not a fantasy review channel. But this book follows 5 different characters. We have Hassan, who I believe is the prince of this kingdom, but someone else has like usurped the throne, so he's not really in charge at the moment. We also have a chick who murders people for their blood so that her sister can stay alive or something like that. We have a guy who is a gambler. We have some other characters who I can't remember the names of right at this very moment. Oh, we have a guy who's like kind of part of an order. I don't know if it's like a military order or if it's like a religious order. I can't really tell. It seems like maybe a mix of both. There's a lot going on. I feel like I'm getting info dumped a lot of things is my issue. I feel like I'm not invested in any of the characters, and granted, I'm only 20% in. Maybe I'll grow to really like the characters, but I don't think that's the case. I really feel like I am bored. Six of Crows didn't feel info dumpy like this, and I think that's what this book is typically compared to because it is a multi, I was gonna say dual POV, multi POV story, but not loving it. And I really don't see myself updating you multiple times about this book, to be honest. I think I'm just gonna like try to speed through it and like pray it improves. Okay, my friends, many developments. I have finished There Will Come a Darkness, and I have also just DNF'd another book. As if I've DNF'd any books up until this point. I DNF'd a book, so that means we only have 1 book left, which is mind-blowing and also exciting. Let's talk about the things first, okay? There Will Come a Darkness, I was massively disappointed by. I think for me, I expected a different book going into this, and I don't know what other book I was thinking of when I purchased this book, but for some reason I was thinking this was going to be sapphic. I thought this was going to be like enemies to lovers and or like a little science fiction-y, so I was definitely thinking of a different book when I picked this one up. So that just goes to show being a little bit more strategic with buying the books is smart, right? Like I was just buying things based off of hype and not even really looking at the synopsis before buying books. So do I regret buying this one? Massively. It's not that this book was terrible, it's that this book really is not something that is new or exciting. I think it definitely is a book that a lot of people could enjoy, and it's certainly one that is following, I would say, this slightly newer trend in the YA fantasy space. I don't know if it's like the newest trend because I'm not really keeping up with YA fantasy at the moment, but it really feels like a few other books that I've read. In some ways, this kind of reminds me of, cannot remember the name of the book, but I will insert a picture of it right here. It kind of reminds me of that, just in a different setting. If you liked that book, I think you actually might like this one too if you want a like higher fantasy world. So I briefly touched on what this book is about, and I'll try, I guess, to kind of like talk a little bit about it so we can move on. But basically, in this world, there are a population of people called the Graced, and they are people with powers, and the big bad, the villain in this world, wants to, I guess, eliminate the people who do have powers. There's also prophets that have abandoned the people. Now there's going to be some sort of like age of darkness, unless this person who is foretold in the final prophecy like comes to save the world. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson, and also kind of reminds me of, again, that kind of popular YA fantasy book right here that I think a lot of people enjoyed. I think my issue here is that I felt like it was kind of info dumpy. It didn't really feel like anything new, and I didn't really love any of the characters. I kind of liked the female assassin, what's her name, like Afira or something like that. Overall, this is just not really my kind of book. I say that as if I'm not going to be picking up Six of Crows for a reread in September, but I just feel like for me, YA fantasy kind of all seems to run together, and I think that's not necessarily the fault of the genre or anything. I think that authors write to whatever is most marketable, and I think that a lot of YA readers would like a story like this. It's just not really for me. I'm a romance reader. We get it. Moving on to the book that I DNF'd, The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender. I'll insert a picture of the actual cover right here. Wow. I really wanted to give this an honest shot. I started reading it physically, and actually I really like the typeface in this book. I think it's actually kind of pretty, but I wasn't really drawn in by the words on the page themselves, right? I decided to pick up the audiobook instead, and the audiobook, totally pleasing listening experience. Like, very fine to listen to. I was fully tuned in. I was playing Tetris on my computer, which is like focus mode for me. Like, I am paying attention. I'm not scrolling Instagram. I'm not getting distracted. I am paying attention to this book. I wish I weren't, to be honest. This book is really bizarre. It is supposed to be this kind of like sweeping family saga. At the beginning of the story, we have our main character, Ava, being born, and she is born with a full set of bird wings. And everybody's like, oh, this is so bizarre. This is so weird. And we get thrown into the past where we get to learn the history, I want to say, of her great-grandmother or great-great-grandmother. We get to see some of her family members dying in sort of tragic and mysterious ways. We get to see kind of the weird workings, I guess you could say, of love and sex. I think that's really where my issue with this book lies. This is a YA contemporary novel, to my knowledge. Actually, you know what? Let me fact check. According to Goodreads, it is a young adult book. Let me know if this book was marketed incorrectly or if I'm missing something, but from my knowledge, to my knowledge, this is technically a YA title. Not only do I not really care, obviously, about a sweeping family saga, that's just not my thing. It's not my thing. It's never been my thing. It will never probably be my thing. Kind of callous ways that people die in this book that was upsetting to me, and the way that sex was talked about was so weird to me. I have read many a YA title in my day. I am old. The handling of sex in this book is bizarre to me. It does not feel like a YA title, and it's not like this book is overly graphic. It's not like this book is one that is addressing sexual assault head on and is trying to like teach a moral sort of lesson about that either. It's just, I can't put into words how strange it is. I had to DNF this book at the point, and this is not even like the first weird circumstance that this happens. The characters, I guess his mother passes away when he is quite young. He stays in bed with her deceased corpse for a few days until it starts smelling, which is weird. And then he immediately goes and like works on a farm or something. And since he looks older than he really is, he's able to get jobs and like sustain himself. But then he is essentially come on to by the owner of the establishment, the woman that owns the place that he's staying, and he's like, oh my god, I'm 13, don't do this. It felt gross, obviously, clearly. The way that those scenes are handled in this book really felt out of pocket to me, and again, maybe I'm missing something, but I feel like I was promised with this book a magical tale that's like a little bit heartbreaking. I was picturing something like A Million Junes by Emily Henry, something where it's like star-crossed lovers, and they couldn't be together because she has these weird wings or something like that, with some sort of family trauma in the background, right? But that's not really how the story is told. It just felt like trauma for the sole purpose of trauma in this book, multiple times over for multiple characters, multiple generations. And I guess you could say that that's the point of the book, or I haven't gotten to the point of the book yet, but this, I feel like, was another circumstance where too much time has passed since purchasing this book, incorrectly assumed certain things about a story before going into it, and then I am left ultimately disappointed when picking it up and it doesn't live up to the expectations or the summary that I have of the book in my head. head. And I feel like this happens quite often, and I think it's not only something that is tied to whether or not I regret buying a book or buying a book without really reading the synopsis. I think sometimes a book can be talked about so many times by so many different people on the internet before we get to it that we have, again, these expectations in our head of what this book is going to be, and maybe sometimes that's unfair, or the explanations that people are giving are not incorrect, but are leading us into a false sense of what the book is actually about and how we're going to feel about it. And I think that is definitely the case with this one. This is a book that I have had on my TBR since 2017, since before even starting a YouTube channel. I'm pretty sure that I bought this off of the recommendation of Hannah, because I think that she really enjoys this book, and I'm not saying that her recommendation was poor and that she shouldn't recommend this book, but it was something that I wasn't expecting personally. And I feel like the things that I didn't like about this book are things that aren't talked about often. I feel like I have heard that assault is definitely a part of the story, but I just didn't expect it to pop up in the way that it did. Yeah, I don't know. I just also am not really in the market for a sad story, so I guess that's on me and my taste in books, but I feel very confident in DNFing this book. I sincerely do regret purchasing this book. Even when I did purchase this, I think I knew that this wasn't my kind of story, but it was okay, maybe this is outside of my comfort zone and other people again like it and have recommended it and I trust these people, but sometimes we need to trust ourselves, I think, is the lesson here. Being said, I shouldn't trust myself because I'm picking up Honest Illusions by Nora Roberts next. This is the final book for this video, the final book that I regret buying. And you know what? I'm going to take the half price book sticker off of this so we can really get a gander at this beautiful cover with this butterfly. She is something. I didn't get much of an opportunity to read last night, but I have been flying through Honest Illusions this morning. Obviously, I'm in my PJs, so I'm moving a little slowly in other parts of my life, but it's fine because I've gotten 170 pages into this 500-page book. Roxy is our heroine and our hero is Luke. And I, for some reason, thought this was only going to be a single POV story. It was all going to be from Roxy's point of view. But the majority of the beginning of this book is actually Luke's point of view and how he comes into Roxy's life in the first place. So Roxy is the daughter of this world-renowned, of this pretty talented magician named Max. He has a woman in his life named Lily who also travels with him and his daughter Roxy. And Roxy is learning the tricks of the trade. Also, Max is a jewel thief. That's kind of how he keeps his life afloat and or has investments going so that his daughter can go to college and things like that. At the start of the story, we meet Luke. Luke is a little boy who ends up meeting Roxy and her dad at this carnival. They are traveling. They own the carnival apparently, and this is one of the places that Max ends up doing his magic routines. And Luke is a little boy trying to pickpocket people at the carnival. He ends up getting caught by Max, and Max ends up taking him under his wing and ends up basically adding him to the family. He's a few years older than Roxy. I want to say he's 12 at the start of the story, and we get to kind of see the life of these traveling people through the eyes of a young boy. They do end up landing back in New Orleans, which is where I think their home base is, but they, travel often to perform these magic shows, and it's kind of heartwarming actually seeing how Luke enters into the family and how he gets taken under Max's wing, gets mothered by Lily, and basically gets the life that he always really deserved. He was abused growing up, and so it's nice seeing him start to trust people. There are people that come in and out of the lives of the magicians. There's a guy named Sam who comes into everybody's life, and he's kind of a bad guy, and that's their first run-in with being scammed themselves, even though they are scammers. At this point in the book, we are aged forward, and Luke and Roxy are, I think, 17 and 20 or something like that, and we are becoming privy to the fact that there might be a little bit of a life with Derek situation going on. We've had one encounter, actually just stopped at the encounter between Roxy and Luke. There's definitely this built up sexual tension there. They definitely have some feelings for each other, unexplored feelings, and I don't know how I feel about that aspect of the book. The writing up until this point has been surprisingly good. The prologue of this book was in the present day, where we have Roxy having her own show and Luke comes to visit her, and there's this dramatic moment, and I was okay, is this book going to be as corny as that opening? So far, despite the subject matter, it hasn't been that corny. It has a nice found family theme. I like getting to see these two grow up. I don't know. It's tough because I like seeing them grow up together, but I'm also I'm supposed to root for them romantically. I mean, it was a different time when this book was written. It was 1992. But you know what's wild to me? This was a Book of the Month selection, 1992. I didn't know that Book of the Month had been around since the 1920s, but that's very, very fascinating. And apparently, this was up to snuff for book of the month. So I don't know. I don't really know what to say about this story, except for I'm enjoying it. It's definitely something that I wouldn't have picked up on my own, but it is something that definitely feels like a traditional romance. I think this is kind of reminding me in some ways of that Krista and Becca Ritchie series that also focuses on like a Cirque du Soleil sort of situation. I think the close quarters, close proximity definitely is fun. Definitely fun to explore. I don't think childhood friends to lovers is necessarily bad, but I do think it's a little strange having Max call the kids his kids. I mean, Roxy and Luke don't call each other like brother and sister or anything, but Max is like, oh, my two children. So I don't know. This book is so silly. Okay, let me grab it so you can actually see what I'm talking about, lest you forget that we're reading a book about a magician and her con man. Okay, so Roxanne and Luke have officially gotten together, and no one seems to be like concerned about this. If anything, everybody's like really excited for them. Their like surrogate mother, Lily isn't Roxanne's mother, by the way. Roxanne's mom died of appendicitis a while ago. Lily is like super jazzed that they're having sex on this cruise ship. Part of their traveling, I guess, led them to perform on a cruise ship, and it's there that they like run into Sam again. Sam just like keeps popping up in random circumstances, and it's like, okay, sure, these people they didn't even do Sam wrong. Sam's the guy that they like kind of took under their wing and he betrayed them or whatever, like one of the random people that has like come to like be in the carnival or whatever. He scammed some of Max and Luke and Roxanne's like friends, and so they kick Sam out, whatever. So Sam keeps coming back into their lives, and he like threatens Luke a lot. So anyway, they're on this cruise ship, and Sam is there with his like new wife, and they're like, oh cool, we can like scam them out of money. Luke eventually starts getting blackmailed by Sam, and he ends up disappearing during one of these like jewel heists, and this is kind of a problem because Roxanne's pregnant with his baby, and what I'm assuming is going to happen is that like she has this kid, he has no idea, and then like years later he comes back, and like that's where we're picking up the prologue. Like the prologue, she's mad at him and doesn't want anything to do with him, and so I'm like at part 3 of this book, and it seems like that's what it is. His 5-year vanishing act was over, so he abandoned his girlfriend and the baby for 5 years. Granted, I don't think he knew she was pregnant, but like, I don't know, what is it with him and blackmailers? He gets blackmailed by someone else earlier in the story, and I know that he had kind of like a rough upbringing, and he doesn't want the world to know about it because like he has a reputation for himself or whatever. So he ends up paying like his ex-stepdad like $50,000 over the course of a year or something to like make sure he doesn't, you know, get found out. And then I guess Sam's kind of doing the same thing. I don't know, man. Like making idiotic decisions, my good sir. Like let's try to make smarter ones. And I can't imagine that Lily and Max are too pleased with the fact that their surrogate son has left their daughter behind and their grandkid. I don't know, to see what happens. But I don't think this is as like fun as I thought that it was going to be. It's definitely too long. Like this book is 500 pages, and I feel like even though it is sort of like the sweeping saga and we get a lot of insight into the like different aspects of their lives, I feel like I would have preferred it if it were some flashbacks to the past and then some in the present day, and not just like so much time. I don't know, it's just too fucking long, and now we only have like this much of the book for there to be this like satisfying conclusion, and I just don't feel like I'm going to be very satisfied with this guy who abandons again his girlfriend and child. It's like, even if you didn't know she was pregnant, y'all have had unprotected sex this entire time. I didn't see mention of condoms, so anyway, so I'll finish it and let you know how I don't know how to feel about this book. I feel like I haven't really been, you know, saying, oh, I think this is gonna be a 3 or a 4. I don't know because this book is kind of weird, but like it's fun. It's not great. I don't know. The sex scenes are kind of cringy, but I do like the way Nora Roberts builds sexual tension. It's definitely a slow burn because they didn't get together until like, I don't know, a while into this long ass book. So no, this one's weird. This one's real weird. Finishing out a video in my pajamas, it does sound like something I would do. Okay, I finished Honest Illusions. I don't know, this was a really weird one, just in general. I mean, I knew it was a weird book going into it. The cover, the description, it being like a 90s romance. This romance is older than me too. Wow, okay, interesting. What to say, what to feel, what to think. I think my issue is that, well, this man left his his girlfriend and, unborn child. That's kind of not great, even if he didn't know about the child. But I think my bigger issue is that whenever he comes back into their lives, she acts like nothing really happened, and he proposes like a way to get back at the guy who like blackmailed him by basically blackmailing him? I don't know. Framing him for something. Luke and Roxanne end up teaming up to put a bunch of stolen jewels into Sam's house and to frame Sam for it. And I think he's running for like senator or president or something like that of Tennessee. So they basically ruin this guy's life, which I mean is fair since he kind of fucked up. No, I just feel like things wrapped up a little too nicely, and at the end of the book, everything is very chummy, and we have the son, Nathaniel, the like little 4-year-old, calling his dad daddy, even though he hasn't been in his life for very long. It felt like a lot of things were a little too convenient, and I guess that was kind of just the name of the book in general. Like, if you read this book, everything feels very convenient, a little bit cheesy, and I mean, it was an enjoyable read. I wasn't upset about this. It definitely took me by surprise, but I do think that I regret this purchase. I mean, in some ways I'm glad that I read it because, like, I feel like I haven't actually finished a Nora Roberts before. Tried to read some of her other books and just haven't gotten through them. But this one was, like, interesting. I would be interested to pick up more from her in the future, so I don't know how I feel about this video in general. This is definitely one of the strangest I Read 5s I've ever done in terms of maybe subject matter, also just outcome. So I guess let's like briefly go through the books and I'll kind of like tell you my final thoughts. So the first book that we read was Called Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. Even though I don't think this book really needed to exist, I do think it was kind of a fresh and new story in this universe. And while I do deeply regret buying this book, I am not mad that I read it. And I think that's kind of the running theme here. Kind of the same thing with Fountains of Silence. This book I genuinely enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars. It was a really good time. Maybe not a good time. It was very educational and I'm glad that I read it, though I do regret buying it because I'm not really a historical fiction girly. I do think this book kind of makes me want to jump outside of my comfort zone more often though, especially when it comes to books with subject matters that I don't typically read about, because I did learn something. I do find this book was valuable to me, and while I probably won't be keeping any of the books that I read for this video, this one I could maybe see myself keeping. The next book that I read I think was easily my least favorite. There Will Come a Darkness. This is a YA fantasy book that I really thought that I was going to enjoy, but sadly it wasn't really for me, and I think that's just because this book felt like a lot of other YA fantasies I've read before, and it felt a little bit too surface level, a little too shallow for me. That being said, I don't think this is a bad book, and I do think that other people might really enjoy this one, especially since I think there are a good diverse cast of characters. We have some queer characters as well, which is pretty nice. Overall, this just like wasn't for me. Next, the DNF here, The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender. This one I am glad that I read because I have owned it for forever at this point, but this is not a book that I would recommend to people. I don't really see the value in it. Granted, I didn't finish it, so maybe there is value later on. Maybe this is a book that really connects with people, but I feel like the way this book was written just wasn't really that appropriate for a YA audience, and it just left me feeling deeply unsettled, so wouldn't really recommend it. And lastly, we have Honest Illusions by Nora Roberts. This one, again, like 3 stars. It was interesting. It was something. I regret buying it. I will be unhauling it, you know. It is what it is. Now, I don't know that there was really a point to this video, except for sometimes you buy books, sometimes you regret buying those books, and yet sometimes I guess they turn out teaching you important lessons about your reading taste and how you should purchase books in the future. I feel like going forward, I will not be purchasing books that I just pick up at random for a video concept that I may or may not carry out. I will not be picking up books based purely on hype, say as if I didn't purchase Magnolia Parks recently. I'm gonna do better, okay? I have been doing better. I haven't really bought books this year, so, you know, I think some lessons have been learned. I am going to continue to read my physical backlist to maybe punish myself a little bit for my poor decisions. Anyway, hopefully this was in some way entertaining. I am actually feeling pretty positive about this experience. I hope that comes off in the footage, even if some of the books weren't great. I had a good time doing this. I'm surprised at the outcome here. But thanks so much for watching. Love you so much, and until next time.